Welcome back to Shattering Myths. It's always nice to turn the page. We're now going to consider Yahowah's testimony. For the last few weeks, we have been analyzing the first three statements that he etched in stone, considering every word, evaluating every aspect of what he said, because those first three statements that he has provided to us give us so much information in terms of how we ought to respond to God. Tells us who he is, the role that he is willing to play in our lives, the things that he likes, the things that he dislikes, and almost all of it is the inverse of what we are told in society through our religions and political leaders. So now, with the first of the two tablets complete, we know that God has provided us with the vantage point that we need to facilitate our understanding of his revelation. And as we were talking in the first segment, a vantage point, a perspective, is really what's required to transition from knowing to understanding. You need to have a foundation and a proper view. And once your perspective, once your attitude, once your vantage point is properly established and grounded, it's amazing how much clearer the picture around you becomes. It is why, with less knowledge than experts, you can resolve issues and understand the cause and effect of issues long before the experts can, if you're properly grounded and have the right vantage point. That was the purpose of the first three statements that Yah etched in stone. He wanted us to be properly grounded and to have the right perspective. He introduced himself by name. I am Yahowah, your God. Very first thing he wrote. He introduced himself by name. Now, you'd think that would be important. Of course, men then promptly said, no, we can't have that. We can't have God introducing himself by name. How in the world are we going to function as a religion? How are we going to get people by the hundreds of thousands to worship a pope if God is approachable on a first-name basis? So we, of course, changed that to, I am the Lord your God, completely inverting his persona from loving Father to controlling Lord. He told us that his written word provides the perspective, the information we need to know to appreciate the role he personally played in rescuing us from the crucible of judgment, from the oppressive political and religious schemes of man. That's the next thing he said. I am your Savior. I personally led you away from the corruptive and the oppressive, the enslaving institutions of man. Religion, politics, patriotism, military schemes, economic schemes, work-based salvation schemes. I freed you from that. I am your Savior. It was me personally doing that, just as it is Yahowah personally facilitating our salvation and enabling the promises of the covenant through Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. Yahusha is a diminished manifestation of Yahowah. He is Yahowah saving us. He is God on his knees lifting us up. He is the hand of God reaching out to us. He's the living manifestation of the Word. God told us that we will cease to exist if we continue to worship gods of our own making, whether they are political gods or sports heroes or they are religious icons. Yah said that he is opposed to religious rituals, to religious rhetoric, to religious art, to religious statuary, to religious icons, and all forms of religious imagery. He said that he is passionate about our relationship with him, and he wants it to be exclusive, like a faithful, monogamous, and loving marriage. by telling us that he would hold those hostile to him accountable for the perverse act of twisting and manipulating his message. God not only affirmed that many people would distort and pervert his testimony, editing his scriptures to their liking, but also that our children would be victimized by society's willingness to deviate from his way in this way. Having reiterated the 5 conditions of the covenant, Yahowah's testimony has undermined every popular religious scheme. God declared that he would personally prepare, perform, and produce on behalf of thousands, not millions or billions, the unearned favor and unfailing mercy that would lead to our salvation. This means that the Savior is Yahowah himself, and that just 1 in a million people will avail themselves of his generosity. That long snake of pilgrims in Rio de Janeiro is an example of those who are like lemmings walking off the cliff. Further, those who rely on God's provision so as to be saved come to love Yahowah and his Shem, his personal and proper name. But more than this, they have all approached God by closely observing and carefully considering, shamar in Hebrew, his terms, the terms which are enshrined in his Torah, the conditions he delineated not only for the path home, but to engage in a relationship with him, the covenant. And yet this path, one where our devotion is directed toward the God of the Torah, one where we're asked to observe the Torah, one where we're encouraged to answer God's invitations to meet with him, one where we are asked to embrace the conditions of the covenant. All of these things are in direct conflict with the paths prescribed by Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Mormons. Few statements have been as inadequately and errantly translated as what God said in what has become known as his first 3 commandments. And yet collectively, the convoluted biblical renditions serve to prove the validity of Yahowah's prediction that men would corrupt his word. Accurately rendered, we find God asking us not to twist or pervert his testimony, which leads to deceiving others, causing them to miss the way. But knowing that many would do this very things in the names of their religions, Yahowah warned us, and he warned those who would mislead, those who would promote ineffectual, lifeless, and destructive lies, that he would not forgive them, that those who sought to negate the power of his name would ultimately be incarcerated. And that, my friends, is going to make hell a very political and religious place. This profoundly important introduction by Yahowah himself is then followed on the second tablet by 7 instructions. They are presented in the usual 6+1 formula, emblazoned in Yahowah's plan of salvation. The first of these, therefore, focuses on the Shabbat, on the promise of 7 itself. Here is what God etched in stone. Remember the Sabbath, Zakar, memorialize the Shabbat, the 7th day, because it is set apart. Kadash. 6 days you can actually and continuously work, and you can genuinely engage in the totality of your service representing the messenger and proclaiming the message, Malaka. But the 7th day, the Shabbat, the Sabbath, the day of promise of Yahowah your God, you should never actually engage in any part of the work of God's representative and messenger. Yourself, your son, your daughter, your male and female servants and staff, your means of production, as well as those visitors who relationally are in your home, property, or community. For indeed, in 6 days, Yahowah acted and engaged, preparing and producing everything associated with completing, accordingly, the heavens, the spiritual realm, and the earth, the material realm, and the seas, and all that is relationally in them. and he became completely settled during the almighty seventh day. Therefore, Yahowah blessed and adored Barak. He knelt down in love towards everything associated with this day, the Shabbat, setting it apart. Now, if you are not someone who values every word Yahweh spoke, every word that Yah etched in stone, then you might write this off as a rule for Jews, that they should keep the Sabbath. You'd have some maybe inclination that the Sabbath is a Saturday, but if you're a Christian, you think that that was replaced by Christians on Sunday, and that this stuff no longer applies, that the God who etched this in stone was not to be taken seriously, that his plan didn't work, so you had a new God come, and that new God established Sunday as the day of worship. If you're a Muslim, then you think that your God confirmed this Torah by telling you to bow down to him and moon him 5 times a day on Friday. If you are someone who actually wants to know God by name, as he actually revealed himself, as he actually is, if you're someone who wants to know and then understand what he is offering in terms of a relationship and salvation for those who are engaged in this relationship, then you are someone like me that wants to ponder not only every word in this statement, to fully appreciate everything that God had to reveal to us through these words, but you also not only want to dig down deep into the details, but also want to see the big picture. There's nothing here about worship, not a single word related to worship here. The Sabbath is not a day of worship, and Sunday therefore could not have replaced it as a day of worship. God does not want to be worshipped. God would be so much diminished from who he is the moment he requests from us to bow down and worship him. He would take himself down to the level of the adversary, of Hasatan, if he wanted to be worshipped, as opposed to be respected, to be loved, to be embraced as our Heavenly Father. So when we return to Shattering Myths, we're going to consider that first line. Why did God say for us to remember it, and what does it mean to set this day apart? Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're considering the first of 7 instructions that Yahowah etched on the first of the 2 tablets, and there are some profound insights that we can garner from this just on the surface of it. God described the importance of the day in the first statements. Remember. It's from Zakar. Zakar is to remember, to memorialize, to recall. So it's something that God has said, I want this to be foremost in your mind. And I mean, that foremost is maybe a bit of an exaggeration, which foremost is the first 3 statements that he etched on the first tablet. But to be something that you understand, that you recall, that is important to you, that has top-of-mind awareness. So remember. Now, to use remember, too, that also means that there's something that God has told us previously regarding the Shabbat that is there for us to remember. You can't tell somebody to remember something you have not told them about yet. You know, remember is, I've told you something here, now I want you to remember that. And he did. Yahowah used the example, and he referenced it here, of creation. Creation was described in the manner of 6 successive days of creation followed by a day of rest. Now, there's more to that than just the 6 plus 1, because each day represents a fundamental aspect of our salvation and the path that we walk to God. Those 7 days plus the ultimate destination, which is the day of rest, mirror the 7 invitations to meet with God, the Moed Mikre, where the opening doorway is Passover, and ultimately we end up camping out with God in his home on Sukkah on the 7th day. So those 7 days mirror that. In those 7 days, God told us how he himself spoke the universe into existence, telling us the power of his words, that if we want to continue to exist in his universe, we need to understand the power of his words, which we find in the Torah. It tells us that the individual who is speaking to us through these words that he etched in stone is the very creator of the universe. His explanation of how and when he created the universe is precisely accurate. In fact, it's not just until the last 50 or 60 years that science has come to understand that what he said was always true, and has been true for well over 3,000 years. The universe had a beginning. God calls it the Big Bang. Yes, there were dinosaurs. He specifically references them. He talks about the evolution of things and how he created the initial calculation and released the precise amount of energy for life as we know it to exist. How he designed the language of life and DNA, and how various life forms evolved from plant to animal, and how all were created by him at a precise point with a literal explosion of life, just as the fossil record proves. And he speaks of 6 24-hour days from our perspective, or from his perspective, I should say, at creation. 6 24-hour days from his perspective at creation, being the time required from the Big Bang all the way to life as we know it. And when we examine the cosmic microwave radiation that is emanating still in space from the Big Bang, we find that the wavelength of time is stretched to 10 to the 12th power. And when you do the math relative to 26 24-hour days, you find that it comes to just shy of 15 billion years. His timeline was precisely accurate. And so it was that presentation that he is telling us to remember. You know, there's aspects of it, too, that he tells us on the 4th day, where he goes into great lengths, that the greater light will become visible as a sign for us to be able to understand the moed, the meetings. And surely 4,000 years after Adam and Yahowah were expelled from the Garden of Great Joy of Eden, on the 4th millennium of human history, with that date as the starting date, we find that Yahowah came as Yahusha to fulfill the first 4 moed, the literal sign of God, the symbol of the greater light, visible before us, illuminating the path. He too, by the way, observed the Shabbat. So if you're a Christian and you're not observing the Shabbat, don't pretend that you're following him, because you're not. So he says remember, which means we need to go back to that time to have the proper perspective of recognizing we're dealing with the creator of the universe, who spoke the universe into existence, who told us that he was akin to light and therefore is energy. Remember that on the 7th day he rested. Understand the relationship, therefore, of the Shabbat to who God actually is. That's just the beginning. Next we'll consider set apart. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. I'm your host, Yahowah. So God began the 7 instructions with remember the Sabbath. Remember the 7th day. Shabbat is the Hebrew word not only for 7, and so it's not saying, I want you to remember Saturday. Unfortunately, today, the day that we call the 7th day of the week is called now Saturday, which is named after Saturn, in commemoration of its Latin influence and the pagan religion of Rome, where Saturn was considered God. Yahowah actually just numbered the days of the week, 1st through the 7th. The first day of the week, that would be Sunday, And the seventh day of the week was the seventh day of the week. He called it the Sabbath because Sabbath means seven. The seventh day of the week, it's interesting now that there's so many things that God established in his Torah that are memorialized in the lives of people around the world that just don't realize it. That's today, every country in the world, the week is 7 days long. In every country of the world, the seventh day is what we call Saturday. First day of the week is what we call Sunday. They have different names for it in different places, but we all have the same calendar, a week based on 7 days. The Sabbath day, he says, speaking of Sabbath, Sabbath means more than just seven. It also means promise. And in fact, in Hebrew, Shabbat is both a noun and a verb. You see, Shabbat as a noun means seven and promise, so it's the promise of seven. As a verb, Shabbat means to observe, to participate in the Sabbath. It's the actionable form of Shabbat. You know, the Jewish religious leaders would tell you that you can't do anything on the Sabbath, and that they have this enormous list of rules of things that you can't do on the Sabbath. But by making Shabbat both a noun and a verb in Hebrew, the Shabbat becomes actionable. There's things we ought to do, and there's things we ought not to do. The first thing is actionable. Zakar is a verb. Remembering, memorializing, prioritizing is a verb. It's actionable. So we ought to use our brains to recall that the seventh day is the day of promise. It's the day that God encouraged us to spend with him. It's the day that he settled our debts so we could settle down with him. It communicates the pattern for which the universe was created, for which life exists. Yes, all based on seven. Everything important that God communicates is based on seven. And it's not just seven, it's the equation that leads to seven. You won't need your calculator for this. The carbon-based life forms, with 6 being the molecular weight of carbon, whom God said were conceived on the 6th day of creation. That would be humankind. That mankind, represented by the number of 6, plus God, who is 1. Well, what do you get when you add 6 plus 1? That's the answer. It's the answer to almost every question about Yahowah. 6 plus 1 equals 7. We take 6 steps to God and we end up in his home. That's what the Moed Mikre tell us. 6 days a week, we can do whatever we want to do. But he just says, 1 day a week, make my promise to you as a result of 7 special. Prioritize it. That is what set apart means. Kodash. Set apart. Set apart. What does it mean to be set apart? God said here, this is his first instruction that he is etched in stone, and he says, remember that the Shabbat day is set apart. Kadash. Now, I suppose that a significant number of those listening to this program understand what set apart means. But if you don't, why are you ignoring this important statement from God? It's the first statement on the second of these 2 tablets. He's saying, remember that the Shabbat day, the Sabbath day, is set apart. What does it mean to be set apart? Well, you can be part of human institutions, or you can be set apart to God. It's a choice. You can be one of those idiots in Rio de Janeiro who on Sunday paid homage to their dunderhead Pope, who was the one who was preaching that we ought not be idolatrous inside of the largest shrine to idolatry in the world. Or You can be set apart from those institutions. You can be set apart from the political institutions with all of their faulty operators, and set apart from them and unto God. And that's what God is saying. On the seventh day, I want you to be set apart from the world unto me. Looked at from the opposite perspective, you can only understand who Yahowah is when you understand the concept of set apart. Because the Spirit, the adjective that modifies Spirit is always Kodesh. Same word. She is the set apart Spirit. What does that mean? She's part of Yahowah, set apart from Him to serve us. Yahowah refers to Yahusha as Kodesh Kodesh. In Hebrew, when a word is repeated, it takes the word to a geometric level. Becomes the most set apart. But Yahusha is the most set apart because he's not only part of Yahowah, set apart from him, but because Yahowah is spirit and thus energy-based, for Yahusha to take on human form, to be corporeal, to matter, be matter, he has to be set apart twice. Set apart from energy to matter, in addition to being set apart from God because he's part of God. When you understand set apart, you understand the family of Yahowah and being the Father, and of having the set-apart manifestation of the set-apart Spirit being serving as our spiritual mother, and of Yahusha being the Son representing the firstborn unto the covenant family. Set apart. At the very least, if you don't understand the concept of set apart in terms of us being set apart from human institutions so we can be set apart unto God, because God in his first requirement of the covenant says you have to walk away from Babylon, walk away from your country, from your human family, from human institutions and entanglements, because God won't allow you to drag that into his home. That's what it means to be set apart from those things, and to be set apart unto God. But if you don't know that, then at least render the Shabbat as special. That's the least you can do. As a day that is special, that is set apart unto God as being special. The day that you revel in your relationship with him, that you learn more about him, that you come to understand the terms and conditions of the covenant. Appreciate the path that he has provided from our world to his over 7 days. So he goes on to say, 6 days you can actually and continuously work. Do whatever you want on 6 days a week. But prioritize your relationship with me on the seventh day. All of your work representing the messenger and proclaiming the message. There are two words here for work. Abad, which is the most common Hebrew word for work, and malaka. Ma'aseh is the second most common Hebrew word for work. So there are two very common Hebrew words for work. Abad and Mash. And here he uses as the second term, however, is malaka. Well, malaka is a feminine variation of malak. Malak is the Hebrew term for messenger. It is used specifically to describe, every time malak is used, it's not just translated messenger or message, but is instead a specific group of messengers which are spiritual messengers, heavenly messengers, Yahowah's envoys. That's what the malak are. Well, malaka is the feminine variation of malak. And so malaka is speaking of the spiritual work done by Yahowah's messengers. And God is saying, when it comes to salvation, I am happy for you to even talk about my message and how I perform my message, and I'm happy for you to do your own work and even talk about and expound upon my work 6 days a week. On the seventh day, though, I want you to realize that I'm the one who settles your debts so you can settle with me. Focus on me. So that's what he's saying here. 6 days, you can actually and continuously work, and you can genuinely engage in the totality of all of your service representing the messenger and proclaiming the message. Malaka. Then he says, but on the seventh day, it's interesting here that he's emphasizing that it's the seventh, so you're out of luck, Christians, with the first day of the week, your Sunday. But he says on the seventh day, the Shabbat, that's like saying 7-7. Or you can realize that 7 is the number, Shab and Shabi, and that Shabbat is the occasion that helps us understand God's promise. He then says it is of Yahowah. So for those who poo-poo the Sabbath, saying that's a Jewish thing, I'm not Jewish, so why should I observe the Sabbath? God doesn't call the Shabbat Jewish. Yahowah says it's the Shabbat of Yahowah, your God. So if you want to poo-poo it, what you're saying is, I want to ignore what is important to God. Are you willing to do that? Do you think maybe there's a consequence of you doing that? And then, what if you take it one step further and says, not only am I going to ignore and dislike the Shabbat of Yahowah, but I'm going to celebrate my worship of God on Sunday, honoring the pagan gods of old. So Yahowah etched in stone, remember the Shabbat. The day is set apart. 6 days you can actually and continuously work, and you can genuinely engage in the totality of all of your service representing the heavenly messenger and proclaiming the message. But on the seventh day, the Shabbat of Yahowah, your God. Profound, isn't it? You know, there are so many people, mostly Christians and lots of Muslims as well. That would be 1.5 billion Muslims and about 2.5 billion Christians. And I would say even the majority of socialist secular humanists, of which there's probably a couple of billion in the world. When you mention the Sabbath, they immediately say, I don't want to observe that. That's a Jewish thing. If you mention Passover, Pesach, no, that's a Jewish thing. Matzah, no, that's a Jewish holiday. Day of Reconciliations, Yom Kippur, as they would say. It's actually Yom Kippurim, Day of Reconciliations, plural. No, that's Jewish holiday. But I'm not Jewish. Why should I pay any attention to that Jewish stuff? Well, you know, on every one of those things, Yahowah expressly says that they aren't Jewish, that they're His. So what do you think God's going to think of you if you say, no, that advice that you gave me of remembering the Shabbat and setting it apart as a special day and recognizing that this is your day, a day that we should focus on you, that no. I don't want to deal with any of that. But you're okay with it because you know the content of my heart. And you won't have a problem with me rejecting everything that you said here, ignoring everything you said, and even denouncing everything you said. Because I'm going to replace it with a day that's my favorite day, the Lord's Day, Sunday. And after all, Christians say, it doesn't really matter, we should be worshiping God every day of the week, is their brain-dead answer to this, not knowing that God doesn't want to be worshipped on any day of the week. But, you know, what I do, I don't think of Sunday as with the pagan heritage of being the Sunday worshiping the sun god of pagan religions of old. I don't make that connection. Since I don't make it, that's not what I think of it. And I feel good when I worship my God. It's got to be fine. No, it's not fine. God is saying that if you want to have a relationship with Him, if you want Him to save you, if you want to be one of the thousands who are the beneficiaries of his mercy, then you need to pay attention to his instructions. And foremost of those instructions that provides you a perspective from which you can understand and therefore intelligently respond to what he's offering is this concept of 6 + 1 = 7. Of us with God is God's idea of perfection. He wants to be with us in this regard. So he says but the seventh day, the Shabbat of Yahweh your God, you should never actually engage in any part of the work of God's representative and messenger. Now, why does he say that? Because God wants us to always remember and understand that he himself saved us. That's the first statement that he etched in stone. I, myself, Yahweh, descended to lead you away from the crucible of Egypt, from slavery, from servitude, from religious and political oppression. I did it. Me. You know, if you think that you can save yourself and you just go about your ordinary business and you think you can save yourself because you've done some good deeds, because as this Pope said of those who are homosexual and said, you know, so long as they're people of goodwill, what does it matter? So if you think your goodwill matters, if you think you can save yourself, if you think you can rely on a human institution, your military for your safety, your religion for your salvation, have at it. But God is saying here, what I want you to recognize, and particularly on the seventh day, that I myself saved you. Don't try to save yourself, and for God's sake, don't pretend to be saving others. Don't think your Sunday preaching is going to save anyone. The only one that can save is me. And I've got a plan that 6 + 1 = 7. Understand it, and you'll have a perspective and understand everything that I'm communicating to you. You'll understand my timeline. You'll understand prophecy. You'll understand my plan of salvation. That's what he's telling us. And he says, so I don't want you to engage as if you were doing the work of salvation on the seventh day, because that's my job. I don't want you to do it, your children's to do it, your sons, your daughters, your servants, your staff, your employees, your means of production, even the visitors who are on your home. Because the seventh day is the day that God acted. And we will return to that thought when Shattering Myths returns tomorrow.